Well, good day and welcome to Moses' online financial course based on the Fearless Farm Finances book. And today we will be covering how to improve farm profitability. My name is Brad Siriani, Farm Business and Production Management Instructor at Western Technical College, and I'll be presenting this course today. So our objectives for today, for this lesson, is making decisions based upon the numbers. How do we do that? What useful ratios are we going to use or should we focus on in assessing profitability of our business? And then what are some tips to maintain profitability? And then how do we tell where things are going wrong and make necessary changes? What do we look at? What should we try to discern from that information and make good decisions going forward? And then what are some wealth generators that we can invest in that are going to, be well worth our time and bring value to our business? And then what are some holistic management goal setting processes? And how do we check against your goals? So those are our objectives for this lesson. So, ways to improve profitability. Let's break this down and think of it real simple. Well, if we want to be more profitable, we reduce overhead costs, or often referred to as our fixed costs. We can reduce our costs and get the same amount of revenue or more. We're going to improve profitability. We can also reduce our variable costs, our feed and labor, etc. And or we could increase production. If we increase production at the same level of expense investment, we're going to be more profitable if we can market them at the same price or higher as we have in the past. So those are our simple ways to improve profitability. So right now I'm just going to pause for a moment throughout the lesson and other lessons that I may do. I'm going to include resources like this in there for you to be able to look at things a bit differently and to make some decisions and learn more. So this one is a procedure for diagnosing a farm profitability problem. And it was from a publication from the University of Arkansas, which was adopted by someone else, or from someone else. But I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but just understand that we start out at the top of this chart with the value of farm production. And we go, if it's low, we're going to follow down the left-hand side. If it's high, we're going to follow down the right-hand side. And it's a great little tool to get you thinking about, wow, this I'm doing good, this I'm having some trouble with. And it's a good way for you to just kind of step back and look at, wow, I'm having a profitability problem, but I'm having a hard time figuring out why. Use this chart. So what are some useful ratios in assessing profitability in our businesses? Well, our asset turnover ratio, our operating profit margin. And those will be the focus of our presentation today. So let's just dive right into it and get into asset turnover. So our asset turnover measures efficiency in using capital. You could think of it as capital productivity. So what's capital? Well, these are our assets that we have that we're using to generate revenue in our businesses. So if we're generating a high level of production with a low level of capital investment, it will give us a high asset turnover rate. If the turnover is low, you'll want to explore methods to use the capital invested much more efficiently or sell some low return investments. It's like selling unused or unused equipment and or unproductive land or unused land. So our asset turnover ratio calculated is the value of farm production divided by our average value of farm assets. So let's look at an example. If our total farm revenue is $650,000, and I'm going to compare another one at the same value of $650,000, and our value of our farm assets is $1.2 million versus $2.5 million. What is our asset turnover rates for these two? So, in the first example, we come up with 54%, which if you look down at the bottom, anything above 45% is strong. Our second example was at 26%. Again, if you look, that's less than 30%, so that's vulnerable. So some of the things you might think about here is, wow, my farm revenue, $650,000 on $1.2 million versus $650,000 at $2.5 million. You know, what is going on in that business? There could be many reasons, but just think about that. One is generating much more revenue off of their assets versus the other. And this is an important one for you to think about in your business. So now, how do you improve your asset turnover ratio? So we have a poor ratio. What do we do now? Well, considering the formula, we should guess that we need to increase revenue or decrease assets. Sounds simple. So what are our options? Well, we can maintain and or increase yields or our production to generate more revenue. Or we can change yield or produce more. So what I mean by change is we could change the varieties of the seed that we're planting. We can change to a different crop altogether. Whatever it is to generate more revenue. We could also increase the amount you sell revenue. Again, that could either be producing more, or depending on your situation, if you're a livestock feeder, you could potentially feed less and sell more of it, just depending on the situation. Another way is we could share assets. We could lease or custom hire. So sharing assets, it seems like this used to have been done much longer ago where neighbors shared things. It seems these days you don't see that as much, but I would suspect based on what's going on in the industry these days with lower prices, you're going to start to see more sharing again. But then also too, you can lease or custom hire, and all those things we'll talk about a little bit further here. And then there may be some other things too that I haven't mentioned. So with asset turnover, though, always consider the consequences of your actions. You'll hear this from me probably in other presentations too. But I think it's very important for you and your business to always know that if I make this decision, this is what could potentially happen. Good, bad, or indifferent. So will an increase cost you more? So if we're going to increase something, is it going to cost us more? So are we going to invest more? And if so, are you getting more in return? Because obviously if we're not getting more in return, that investment's going to show up in our expenses. It's going to drive our expenses up. But if we're not getting more, that's not going to look more for or not our expenses and our assets. It doesn't mean we're going to get more in return. So now maybe you should think about, well, why would you decrease your assets? Well, you might have too many assets. So do you have assets that you owe money on that are not productive? Machinery, land, etc. Or do you have assets that you just don't fully use or use at all, but they sit around, you look at them all the time, you might move them around the farm a lot, but they're not being used. So you may as well turn that into cash, get rid of it, because it's an unused asset and it's going to affect your asset turnover rate. Not that your asset turnover rate should be the only thing you're focusing on, but it would just be a prudent decision in your business. So let's jump to the farm operating profit margin. So Our farm operating profit margin shows the operating efficiency of the business. So if expenses are low relative to the value of farm production, the business will have a healthy operating profit margin. So low profit margin can be caused by low product prices, high operating expenses, or inefficient production. So net farm income from farm operations plus farm interest paid minus any value of unpaid labor divided by gross farm revenue, which should be accrually adjusted, will give us our operating profit margin. So our example here, $65,500 plus $13,500, and interest paid minus $20,000 for any farm labor or unpaid labor times 100 gives us 15.7%. So if you look down at our colors and from our farm finance scorecard, you see 15%. So we're just barely in the okay category. And obviously for farm operating profit margin, we'd love to be at 25%. But to be honest with you, in many operations, it's difficult to achieve that 25%. But people do, or businesses do. So that's just an example of how to calculate your farm operating profit margin. So again, I've shown these previously, but this is relating to operating profit margin. So if you're weak there, you can look at either how to maintain it, how to improve it, based off of where you rank. So how do you improve your farm operating profit margin? Well, let's analyze the formula. What will affect the numbers based on the formula? So thinking about that, we know it's related to revenue and expenses. So our options would be to reduce expenses or our input costs without decreasing yields. So if we can do that, we know that, hey, we're going to increase our profit margin. We can change the products that we're marketing or producing to those with a higher profit margin. So sometimes people will look at producing food grade soybeans, for example, instead of feed grade soybeans, because maybe the profit margin will be greater. And it could be a change in the type of livestock, could be a number of different things. We could also look at reducing capital purchases and interest. If we reduce capital purchases, assuming that we're going to have to borrow money to pay for many of these, we're going to be paying more interest by doing so. So if we can reduce that, we should be paying less interest. We can also reduce leasing expenses. Maybe we don't need to lease as big of equipment or as much of equipment, but it's a way that, based on the formula, that we could reduce our operating profit margin. We could also reduce labor, taking a hard look at our labor and determining, well, I have enough labor, maybe I'm just not using my labor efficiently. Or, I got too many people running around here, I got to get rid of somebody. We could reduce our inventory. Maybe we have too much inventory. And that depends on the different type of enterprises that you have. But sometimes we can just flat out have too much inventory, and we need to make sure we're keeping track of that. We could change marketing to places with higher margins. Sometimes there's everything from different places or areas of the country to sell to different businesses to sell through. We could get higher margins. We could also maybe decide to change to organic, for example, or other different niche markets that might have higher margins for us. So always consider the consequences of your actions. So decreasing expenses, lower production. So if so, is your margin better? If not, you need to reconsider this and think a little bit more about it and do some more number crunching. What about, why would you lease or custom hire? So can you justify owning the equipment That's the question you have to ask. And if you can't, well, now maybe you should lease or custom hire. So do you have the time and labor necessary to do the custom work more efficiently than they can? And so again, it just depends on your situation. You have to pick and choose your battles. Many times I watch people get caught up in trying to improve their weaknesses when in reality for their business they should expand upon their strengths and probably find someone else to overcome their weaknesses. Because if you just flat out aren't good at it, it's a struggle. So have you recognized the relationship between these two ratios? So using both of these helps you evaluate more of the operation. There's a little bit of zig and zag in these two. So ways to improve profitability. Reduce overhead costs, our expenses. Reduce our variable cost expenses. Increase production, more revenue. Improve your asset turnover rate, 45% or plus. Wow. And improve our operating profit margin to 25% or more. And then can think about profit versus profitability. And I just want to pause for a moment and ask you to think about that. Many times we're asked that question of at the end of the year, you want your business to have made a profit. And that's all great, but does that necessarily mean you're running a profitable business? So a profitable business should have some amount of sustainability built into it so that it can withstand time, has things built into it to make sure that you're doing the best you can to be successful each year and not just being lucky and having a profit this year and Lord knows what next year brings. So other ways to improve profitability is, having equipment that matches your scale. So I have a couple of pictures on the slide to kind of show that. You can obviously have equipment that's too small for your operation, equipment that's just flat out too big. But you need to consider that to make sure that you have the right size, the right type of equipment for your operation. Smart credit card use. If you're using a credit card just for the ease of paying for things and it's paid off every month, I think that's a good thing. If your credit card all of a sudden has things that are past 30 days due and you're paying interest on it, I think that's a whole nother ball game and you should try to stay away from that. Labor flexibility. Is your labor able and trained to do multiple things so that it prevents you from having to have too many people around at different times that need to be trained? Now, sometimes you just can't get away from that, but having a flexible labor force is important. Spend more money up front to save in the long run. Or maybe best put better is if you can't pay cash for 50% or more for your purchases, you should probably reconsider purchasing it. And that's to some people that's a rather lofty goal. You're just getting started, you're new, and it may be very difficult for you to do. But I will challenge you, if you're going to start into the farming or the agricultural businesses, that if you have to have skin in the game to help ensure a better success rate. So always think about, hey, if I can pay for at least 50% of my capital purchases, or if you want to go down to 25%, that's a good start too, but not putting anything towards it, I think, is setting yourself up for failure. Buy in bulk. You can do this on your own, or you can work with your neighbors or fellow business people to buy in bulk and get better prices. You can group your activities and what you do and how you do things and what you have to do so that you can do it more efficiently. And you should then utilize a team of advisors, of people that you trust and have are interested in the success of your business. And this could be someone like myself, as a farm business person, your lender, your veterinarian, your agronomist, etc. Other family members, other business people, anybody like that. But don't be afraid to utilize this team. So there's different tools out there to help us evaluate our businesses, and one of them is the DuPont model. And this one looks at the relationship among operating profit margin, asset turnover, and leverage. And it also is a great example of taking a number of ratios and helping you put them together to see the big picture. So in this particular case, I'm not going to go over all the details, but we're going to look, we're taking our gross revenue minus our fixed cost minus our variable cost, and we're getting a net return. And then we can look at that net return plus our interest expense divided by our gross revenue, and that's our operating profit margin. And then we can look at our gross revenue divided by our total assets, and that's our turnover ratio, our asset turnover ratio. Then we can look at our rate of return on assets minus interest divided by our assets. And then our financial performance measure, which we look at total assets divided by equity. And we look at our rate of return on equity. Wow, we have all these things that we're looking at. But if we plug them all in, if you could plug numbers into all these things and look at your business and follow this, you're like, that's a very interesting model, and it really proves to me how important these ratios are and the numbers that go into these ratios. And hopefully, it can help give you a better picture of how your business is operating. So that's the DuPont model. Here's another one, and it's from the same resource. I forgot to mention that in the previous slide. But this is from a publication called Measuring and Analyzing Farm Financial Performance from Purdue University. And this one looks at return on equity, or ROE, and you saw that on the previous slide. Right. What I really like about this is it shows you in each category. So we're looking at asset turnover, we're looking at gross revenue divided by total assets. What are some things we need to look at that affect that ratio? If we jump to the next one, operating profit margin, what are some things under that affect that number? And then leverage, which we're not going to cover here today, but just it gives you a list of things to think about if I'm struggling in either of those two areas. So how do we avoid train wrecks? Nobody wants to be in a train wreck. So are you able to identify when trouble is looming? It's on the horizon. So what do you look for and what do you monitor? So we've talked about some of this already, but we look at our current ratio. Where is our current ratio at? If it's not at least 1 to 1, we need to dig a little bit deeper and figure out why it's not at 2 to 1. Term coverage ratio below 120%. Our checkbook is not stretching far enough. There's more month than money. Hey, we need to pause, stop. Hey, what's going on? I need to stop the bleeding. I need to fix some things. Are you carrying open accounts? Do we have accounts payable that are in excess of 30 days? Do we have too many credit card accounts? Are we foregoing necessary inputs? And what I mean by that is, are we just omitting things that maybe we shouldn't omit, that we could pay the price for because we're not investing that into our crop or our business? We can maybe take a risk on it and get away with it, which is great, but we need to be very cautious about that. Are we selling some of our inventories to raise cash? Sometimes we're at a point in our business that we have to do those things to survive. But if we just need to recognize that we're doing it and understand the consequence of those actions? Are we accepting lower than market prices just to move product or, to generate cash? If you find yourself starting to do that, be leery, stop, pause, and say, hey, should I be doing this? So what should you do in response to the trouble? Well, number one, and you've probably heard it a million times, and if not, you will, know your cost of production. You must know what it's costing you to produce the products that you're selling. Otherwise, you never know if you're making a profit on it. You need to adjust your expenses in places that matter. Not the things that are easy, not the things that they're the only things that you know about or you understand. You really got to zero in and find, hey, what things matter? What's really going to make an impact by making this adjustment? And it's not saying that little things don't add up to big things. It's just be conscious of, hey, I don't want to just adjust things just to say I adjusted it. It's got to make an impact. Consider selling excess inventory or assets. We already mentioned that. Talk to consultants and your team. And get second, third, and fourth opinions. And do a detailed financial analysis. This is so important and skipped by so many. Your farm should always be doing a farm financial analysis at the end of the year. Determine, hey, how good was I last year? And then do it every year. Develop a trend. Show so you can see your ups and downs of your businesses. So what should you do in response to trouble? Now you know. Now you're really in trouble. You gotta make sure you talk to your lenders. Communicating with them is of utmost importance. They need to know because if they're going to help you, they need to be able to make sure that you're in a position to be helped. Consolidate bills and avoid short-term credit costs. Change your amortization on term debts. Maybe there's ways you can decrease your payments by lengthening out how long you're going to be making payments. Consider capitalizing your current liabilities. Or what we mean by that is take maybe an operating note that's an annual note and convert it to a short-term loan. Maybe you can do it in 3 years. You can have it paid back off. Maybe there's some relatives that want to invest in your business and are willing to give you a loan. Again, if you don't have a business plan, it's something you can show people, your lenders included, of who you are, what you believe in, and where you're going and how you're going to do it. I don't know how you can get anybody to invest in your business, but you might if you're organized. Ask a lender if you can write down a portion of your debt. Sometimes debt can be written down. I put FSA in there because I just want to remind you that it's, especially if you're a beginner, but you don't have to be a beginner, but working with the Farm Service Agency is a very valuable resource. Not just because debt can be written down, but they're a valuable resource. Number 12 is bankruptcy. Sometimes we get to the end and we've given it all we've got, and because maybe bad prices or what have you, bad luck, we have to file bankruptcy. I would say bankruptcy is not for the person that was neglectful and just did a very bad job and knew better. But they can file bankruptcy too. But I guess my point with that is it's not something we should be afraid of. We all have bad luck and we need to move on, and this is a way we can move on. And I encourage you to read pages 145 and 146 of Fearless Farm Finances, where Tom Kriegel talks about managing through difficult times. So what about investing in wealth generators? What can we invest in that generates wealth? Well, before we even do that, begin with the end in mind. You got to have a plan. Having that plan will help you know what you should invest in. Because if you're investing in things that are violating your big business plan, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense then, does it? Either that or you got to change your plan. So you could invest in land and other investments. Sometimes, though, investing in land or buying land isn't the wisest thing. Sometimes it's better for someone else to own it and you rent it than it is for you to be making the payment on it. Products and services. Which products and services are going to bring the best bang for your buck? Who am I hiring? What products am I using? Those are big decisions, and not to be taken lightly. You need to really consider, hey, what's going to bring the most value to my farm? Our machinery, equipment, facilities, and depreciation. What do I need versus what do I want? Paying down principal. Many times, in working with various people, I've heard, I'm not going to put money in my savings account when I'm only getting 2% interest when I'm paying 5% on my debt. And I get that. However, I think there's some truth in you have to be in a position to be able to do that. So let me just step back for a moment. If we're really focused on interest, what's the enemy? The real enemy is debt, because if you didn't have the debt, you would be paying the interest. And I think that's important to keep in mind. So our focus should be, how do we get rid of debt or pay it off as soon as possible? So I put the interest and debt trap. So here's what I mean about the trap and why I think if you're not always in a position to just pay off debt all the time if you don't have money saved, because you'll never get out of debt. If you never have money saved, you can't pay for these little things that come up or when crap happens. So the well goes out or what have you. You have a big electrical mess that has to be fixed. Whatever it is, maybe it's $10,000. If you don't have $10,000 in an account somewhere, guess what you have to do? You have to borrow it. And so you get in this trap and you think you're doing good things by focusing on this interest rate thing. And in reality, you never get out of debt. And it costs you thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of debt or interest payments over the years. So saying that's a perfect segue into solving that problem, and that's by having an emergency fund. Having some cash set aside somewhere for these things to help you get out of that debt trap so you can pay attention to these other things. And lastly, investing in your team. Well, that's not last, but investing in the team. Investing in the team of people that you work with, keeping them informed, taking the time to meet with them, and lastly is yourself. Yourself and your families. You got to invest in yourself, whether that's taking care of yourself, and everything from eating, what you're educating yourself about, and how you're taking time off, and just all the things that it takes to take care of yourself. That you are the number one wealth generator of your business. Invest in yourself wisely. Goal setting. So always remember that what you focus on expands, so be careful what you focus on. And your goals should be indicating what you're focusing on. If you're setting goals each year and you just forget about them, well, that's a problem. So, what about your vision, mission, core values? Those things tell you who you are, where you're going, and what you stand for. Do your goals represent that? Do you have action plans with your goals? You can't have goals and not have action. You're not going to accomplish them. And are the people involved in your business to help you accomplish all those things? So, what about holistic goal setting? And this goes back to the second one, the vision, mission, core values. But holistic goal setting, are you considering the financial piece? Are you considering the social piece? and the environmental pieces of all of that. And it goes back to probably your vision, mission, and core values. Anything you do, if it violates those things, you're probably going to regret it in the future, or you should reconsider doing it. Or you need to change your vision, mission, core values. So just be thinking about that as you're setting goals. Am I violating any of my core principles and values that I've set forth or written down for our business? And be flexible. Sometimes your goals have to be flexible, because sometimes you'll be all ready to plant a crop and the weather doesn't let you plant it, and 3 weeks later you have to change crops because the other one's not going to work anymore. And then monitor the goals. Whether it's annually, monthly, or quarterly, you need to commit to monitoring these goals and checking your progress. Just setting a goal at the beginning of the year and then waiting till the end of the year to see if it happened, I think it's a big mistake, and you're setting yourself up for failure. So in summary, we talked about making decisions based upon the numbers and the ratios that assess profitability. We talked about some tips for being profitable and gave you some other resources there. We kind of looked at how do we tell when things are going wrong and making necessary changes. We talked about investing in wealth generators, and we talked about the goal setting process. So here's some action steps I'll recommend to you. Identify the ratios or measures you want to track this year, and then determine what ways you can generate more revenue. What expenses can you decrease? And then, or maybe another way to look at it is, what expenses might you have to increase to generate more revenue? And then focus on making your business profitable and sustainable, not just on making a profit at the end of the year. How can you maintain a profitable and sustainable business? And does your plan violate your vision, mission, goals, and core values? And what if things go wrong? What would you do? Think about those things now. So, something to ponder. So what is the impact that asset turnover and operating profit margin can or is having on your business right now, today? So, that's the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time and commitment to improving your farm financial knowledge. Again, here's my contact information. Thank you to the writers and contributors of Fearless Farm Finances for providing that resource to you. Again, remember that the information I provided you is in support of this book and in addition to. And thank you to Moses for sponsoring that. And also here's the resources, some of them of which I use that you might find valuable to use as you go forward in your business. So I wish you the best. Thank you for your time.